Goliathan by Weedeater. There's an album that they put out a couple years ago entitled Jason the Dragon. And this was an album that actually made it to number 45 on the US Heatseekers chart, which is kind of crazy whenever you think about it. This is a group that, for the most part prior to that, were largely rather unknown, except for in choice communities among the metal or the stoner faithful. This is a band of the sludgy/stoner persuasion, or as they dub it, weed metal. So, Jason the Dragon, I remember listening to this, I believe it was 2011, was a pretty solid album. It was one that I actually enjoyed and thought for sure that I had done a review on it, but upon some research, I guess I haven't. Either that or it's just buried somewhere and no one knows where it's at. Whatever. Don't know still who Weedeater is? Do you know the name Buzzov-en? No? Well, Buzzov-en are kind of cult icons whenever it comes to this whole, stoner/sludge division, and they were based out of North Carolina. They would come up with the New Orleans, or the southern branch of the sludge department. So this is actually the brainchild of that band's bassist, and you can tell there is a heavy, heavy bass thickness on Goliathan. And we need to speak about this album principally to see if they were able to replicate the success of Jason the Dragon, and the answer to that question is kind of yes and no. And it's kind of more of a no than it is a yes, sadly. I mean, there are still some trademarks from Jason the Dragon, from Weedeater's classic work right there, from what people, will call it. However, it's something that happens way too few and far between on this record in order for it to really have that same genesis point of real excitement. This is one where there are two tracks on here, in Processional and a Benediction, that are the bookends of the album, that act as small little instrumentals that have sparse lyricism on it. They sort of serve as the bookends of the disc, with Processional basically clearly indicating that they hate you. Yeah. And then it sort of, without any transition, goes right into Goliathan, and from Goliathan goes directly into Cain Enabler. Now this is a tactic that they don't use with each and every track. However, with these first couple it is employed, and it can be a bit off-putting to some individuals. However, for me it was a transition that was not all of that out there. This is an album that just doesn't feel like it has that same level of consistency as Jason the Dragon did. There seems to be a lot more simplicity really employed on this album, and the repetition and the repetitious vibe is something that really kind of helps categorize this style of music, and it actually, for the most part, will work very advantageously on its behalf. However, on this album, I just feel as though it's just not as interesting. It doesn't have that same level of pop or zest as some of the previous releases of Weedeater really have possessed. It just is one that feels a little bit dry. It feels a little bit bland to the taste, and it just doesn't have all of that too much to offer, which I'm sure that won't matter very much to the group. But one thing I have to say is about the song Battered and Fried, because every so often this is a group that decides to throw in something that's just completely out there, that's largely acoustic, either that or sounds like it should be on a Sling Blade soundtrack, or should really represent the down south portions of the United States quite well. And by down south, I don't necessarily mean the region, I also mean the backwoods. Battered and Fried definitely showcases that wonderfully, and quite frankly, it's one of the reasons why it's probably one of the best songs on the album. It's different, it's kind of out there, and it's a lovely little deviation from the remainder of this disc. It's certainly one that gets your attention because it's right smack dab in the middle of Goliathan, so whenever you reach this track, it is going to certainly stand out to you and feel exceptionally unique, and chances are, more often than not, you're going to gravitate a little bit more toward this song than you are the others on this disc, unless that kind of thing just completely pisses you off, in which case you need to learn to respect a little more, but that's just my opinion. Aside from that, though, this album maintains some memory here and there. It's something where a lot of it feels very similar in nature, and before everybody goes out there and says, hey, Dope Smoker by Sleep is essentially similar ideas that are just modified. It's basically an exhibition of repetitive sound that has real depth to it, and that album's classic. Why not this? Why does this repetition kind of bode more poorly than something like that? And I think it's just based around the style in which it's employed. I think it's based largely around the remainder of everything that kind of swirls around it. Nothing here just feels like it has that same level of punch that you would hear from, say, a dope smoker, where the repetition is just sort of done a little more aimlessly than than with a lot of clear-cut know-how, or not know-how, but clear-cut understanding of where they wanted the song to go. At times, some of these songs cut off, and you really feel or felt like there was more to them that was just cut off, almost as though they were unfinished ideas that just were left the way that they were. Overall, I'd probably give this album a 71 out of 100. There's enough ideas to keep this cohesive, there's enough ideas to keep this going. It's a relatively short listen at about 34 minutes in length, so it's not something that's going to really tax your time or really tax you that way. It's one that might be a grower for a lot of people. However, for me, it was not one that grew after the handful of listens that I gave it. So, unfortunately, that's my opinion and my story, and I'm sticking to it. But what did you guys think? I want to know what you thought about Goliathan by Weedeater. Let me know in the comments below. And let me know some of your other favorite bands from this style of music. You ready to talk about another album? Because I am. So, let's do it. I'll see you next time.